Hey, welcome back, Modern Math Teacher. Kristen Moore here, your host here on the Modern Math Teacher podcast with another little bit of Poolside PD for you. And today we are talking about the latest book to take the math teacher world by storm. And I know you know the one that I'm talking about. We're talking about none other than Peter Liljedahl's Building Thinking Classrooms. Now, this book is not new anymore, but it is still popping all over the place. And that's because it's got 14 practices in it. And y'all, we cannot master 14 practices in 1 year, maybe not even in 2 years. But a lot of us are trying these days, and that's what's exciting. Let's start by sharing some of the amazing positive things I've seen y'all been doing for the last couple of years. So, between the DMs that I'm getting on Facebook and the different posts I see in the groups, I know that all of you are rocking out some of the aspects that are foundational to a building thinking classroom. And that includes giving those thinking tasks. Guys, I have been using problem based learning and thinking strategy approaches since 2012 when it was not popular. And the amount of shift I have seen in all of the teachers that I talk with and work with and coach from the procedural only focus to this rich thinking task is none other than like astounding to me. So, you guys are doing an amazing job engaging your students with problems that require critical thinking, whether that is through thin slicing and task cards or rich thinking tasks. You guys are completely crushing it when it comes to giving those thinking tasks to your students and doing a really awesome job sharing resources with others. So, kudos to everyone here for that. Another thing that I have noticed that teachers are doing really well and implementing really consistently is forming those visibly random groups. And so, whether you are using cards or a random name generator or a random number generator, or you take it to the class dojo like I do in my class, you name it, you guys are rocking it. Your students are now working and collaborating with teachers. Or not teachers, students that they maybe never would have before. And that is helping with that mobility of knowledge. They're talking with one another, they're engaging in more of that math discourse, and they're sharing ideas and building conceptual understanding together and building off of one another's strengths. So, again, amazing job, you guys, just crushing it. And then the third one that I have noticed that most everyone is using and implementing in a variety of ways is using those VNPSs or any form of like whiteboard or chalkboard or collaborative writing area, promoting that active learning and that visibility of the student thinking. You guys, I swear, Expo probably saw like an exponential increase in sales. And like no pun intended, or well, like maybe a little bit. But you guys are getting students up there. They're working together. They aren't afraid to make mistakes as much anymore. And they're not afraid to get their work out there. So all of those things, super great highlights. Keep doing what you're doing with those. Today, I want to focus on some of the strategies in the book that we maybe need to rebuild or rethink or refine. Okay. So while we're rocking out those three aspects, again, that's the grouping, the thinking tasks, the VNPSs. There are a couple of things that we haven't quite mastered from the whole rest of the 14 practices, from the rest of the toolkit. So, this is what we want to refine and focus on today. There are, in particular, like three practices that a lot of us are working on right now and trying to wrap our heads around, and we've been playing with in our classroom. So, I want to focus on those. And that is the idea of consolidating from the bottom, making meaningful notes, and of course, grading. Now, grading is a whole beast in and of itself. So, we'll be for sure dedicating a couple of episodes throughout this summer into various grading practices. But today, we're going to focus just on those first two, the consolidating from the bottom and the making of meaningful notes. And I'm going to talk you guys kind of through what that's looked like in my classroom and where I'm going from there. So, first up, let's talk consolidating from the bottom. So many of us want to have those rich mathematical discussions in our math class, and the idea of consolidating from the bottom gives us that opportunity. When we're consolidating from the bottom, that involves synthesizing student work and insights rather than just starting from the teacher perspective. So I think that's where one of the shifts is. We have to be really cognizant of what our students are thinking, what they're saying, how they're solving the problems, and we need to find a way to scaffold those or sequence those into a discussion that builds that conceptual understanding. So, a couple of strategies for us to keep trying, keeping it simple here. We want to listen to student discussions. I know that sounds simple, but really listening in and keeping an ear out for some of those key ideas that are coming up, that's huge. And that takes practice to actively listen because so many times we're sitting there with our own ideas in mind that we're waiting for someone to say that. But we want to take a second to pause and just listen in on the conversations our students are having. When you do that, you can identify those key ideas from each discussion as you're walking around the room. You can then use this to select the strategies that you want to highlight for that discussion that's going to come when your students are done with their thinking task. Then I want you to think about how you're going to use those student contributions to build the entire class's understanding. So you want to sequence that conversation that builds from one strategy to the next, starting with whatever the low floor approach was, whatever was most accessible for your students, and then building into that more nuanced problem solving approach to show that no matter what approach you took, you could A, solve the problem, and B, that you can take that and you can become more mathematically proficient with it and you can use more mathematics to help you problem solve. That's really where the key is here is that the students can see that math can be a tool to solve it faster. And that's when they buy in a little bit more to the strategy. And when you're doing this, I also want you to, so you've selected which ideas you want, you're sequencing them in the right way. And when you're getting the students to share and explain what you've put on their board, right, you want to encourage them to explain their reasoning to their peers in student friendly language. You aren't always going to be the one making that connection because you want them to help build that conceptual understanding with their peers and to uncover new connections. Then you can jump in as the expert and help give it real mathematical terminology that hasn't come up. You can highlight key ideas from the learning target that you were going for. One tip I want to share with you guys is to print out the thinking task that you are doing in your classroom. As you're going around your room, take notes, carry it around with you on a clipboard. Take notes all around your room as you're boxing in things on that whiteboard. Make sure you're also like jotting down notes like, oh, I want group one to share this. This was their approach. They did a graph, or these guys made a table, or these guys did a drawing. And then you can look at those notes, kind of sequence what order you want, and then guide your gallery walk or your class discussion that way. Okay. So that's my big tip for consolidating from the bottom. Print out your thinking task, walk around with it, select and sequence. Those might be ideas that you are familiar with. If you are familiar with the book, Five Practices for Orchestrating Productive Mathematical Discussions, which is a long time fave of mine, then you would know selecting and sequencing is part of that. And active monitoring is really part of that active listening stage too. So if consolidating is what you're working on, highly suggest reading this. It will help give you some amazing ideas. Okay. Next up, let's focus on notes. Okay. So after we've consolidated, that's when we want our students to be taking some notes and making some meaning from it. So we want to ensure that our notes are useful and that they are meaningful without reverting to those traditional sit and get, we're all going to copy from the whiteboard or the overhead or whatever it is notes. Okay. So here are some of the strategies that I've been trying in my classroom for the past 2 years. First up, it was very teacher led and traditional. It was still whole group guided style. And so if you're watching on YouTube, you can see I've got this beautiful section here from Unit 1. This was kind of 2 lessons smushed together comparing linear functions. So it is just filled with notes and so many problems. This took 4 pages. 4 pages, probably 45 minutes of my class time was spent just doing that. This is by far my least favorite. The teacher is dictating the notes while the students write. It is often super passive and our students don't engage effectively. I think we all know the detrimental effects of like poor note taking. Okay. So then I shifted. I used similar note model, but I shifted it to my blended model where I implement a modern classroom. And so I would create videos for my students to watch to take the guided notes at their own pace. It had time for them to pause, try the problem, check and see if they got it right, all of that. That was for sure my favorite for a long time, and it still is for a lot of different things. It allows for flexible, self-paced learning, better comprehension, students could get the topic without having gone through the thinking task if they were absent. So that was another key feature here that I'm going to keep doing no matter what. I always like to have some sort of recorded note for the students who were absent and missed out on that thinking opportunity. And then this past year in Algebra 2, all of these are my Algebra 2 classes, we shifted to the 4 quadrant style note taking. That was really big in the fall. And so with ours, we always like to frame it with an essential question and a learning target, key example, key vocab. So again, if you're watching, you can see that here on the screen. So key example and key vocab, and then 2 other quadrants that were some sort of fill in the blank way. And then a summary of big ideas and takeaways at the bottom with a self-assessment. And we tried that out all year long. We stuck with it, but it just didn't resonate with our students the way we expected. Even when we left space for them to pull things from the boards, it was a little confusing for them. Even if they tried making some of it at the boards, it just kind of missed the mark. So it was still kind of confusing and less effective. So I have been fortunate enough to teach multiple grade levels. I've taught Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, and some strategic math courses in my time at my newest district. And so I have been fortunate to be able to experiment with different notes and see what we like and what was working with my students and what wasn't. So we now have a new hybrid model that we're going to use as we do the consolidation. And we are moving into the note-taking process. So we know that some form of note-taking is really helpful for our students to cement that learning from the day and ensure that those synapses, right, are firing in the brain and they stay connected. So how can we use consolidation to build into the new note-taking more intentionally? That was my question at the end of this school year, and that's what I want to help pose to you. So Peter's been sharing some of his ideas for this over the past year, and I've been applying it, right? The 4 quadrants, right? Applying what he's saying into my proposed new framework for consolidating and learning with the notes. So we want to focus on the interactive and student-centered note-taking methods. We want the students to own this learning. It is their notes, their future forgetful self, right? We want to incorporate more discussion and students' input in the note-taking process, so it is not just teacher dictated. And we want to use a variety of problems when possible to deepen understanding and application of concepts. So maybe that's like that sequencing of like you put 3 problems. How would they have been sequenced? Why? So talking about that and engaging them in that process as we do this. Thinking about timing, because that's always a big issue. So a thinking task in my classroom usually lasts anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes. And I want to capitalize on that cognitive energy of my students before my students run out of that energy. So with this discussion-based note-taking framework that I'm going to be using this year, I'm planning on it taking 10 to 15 minutes for that discussion and those notes, including some of that verbal processing and individual processing time. So here's my proposed framework for note-taking that kind of builds in that consolidation. So step 1, I'm going to discuss the goal of the lesson. I want to start with a clear discussion on what the lesson aims were to achieve and how these examples students just shared in their consolidation aligned with that. Okay. Then we're going to identify those learning targets. We're going to look at the thinking task they did, what the learning targets are, and students are going to go back and forth with me. Where did we see this? Where did we find, for example, the lesson I've got here is all about linear functions. So where did we find slope? Where did we find y-intercept? What does it mean to be rate of change? How did you see that in the table? Where did you find that in a graph? So pulling apart that learning target from the learning that they've just done. So they've got all of this good kinesthetic and verbal visual cues to help connect all these notes. Then we're going to do a quick write. And this is where they're going to do their kind of notes, their forgetful selves. They're going to quickly jot down notes to themselves about the key concepts, what they did during the exploration or problem solving time of the day. And this is the part that they want to remember. And so you'll see that in my new framework here, which again, still starts with my learning target at the top and then quick notes to themselves. Optionally at this point is where I'm going to share like the 3 problems, ask students to arrange them in a progression that makes sense from the task of the day. That's definitely going to be something we do if it's a thin slice activity. Otherwise, I might just pose a really good question to ponder and have students discuss with their neighbors about the activity that we've done. And then we're going to kind of formalize that learning, right? If you've seen Mathematic, they do the explore first, formalize later. I love them for that. So this is where we're going to discuss and write down the important notes and vocab that align with the exploration and the goals for the day. And so that is coming in right here, right underneath their quick write. I've got the vocab words or whatever it is, and they're going to be filling those in, adding their notes. We're going to do that kind of collectively. They might do that up at their boards and then put it in their notes, still kind of toying with that idea. Then step 6 is some guided practice. So whether this is them trying that practice on their own, putting it back up at their whiteboards, they're going to have that option. If they want to follow along and do it with me, they can have that option. This is just going to give them a range of problems, sometimes maybe mild, medium, spicy problems that they can try for individual or some partner work. And I can support the students through the guided problem solving. They're going to be able to have access to my answer key to see that their thinking was right or where it went divergent from mine and what they're going to do. So there you go. That's my 6 steps for my new proposed framework for note taking using the consolidation and meaningful notes to my future self from BTC. So discuss the goal of the lesson, identify the learning targets, all of that with the students interactive. 3, individual quick write of notes. This is the notes to my future forgetful self. 4, create a problem or pose a question or, create a problem or a question, pose one. So this is where we're connecting intentionally to that learning goal and seeing the math again in pure math form maybe. And they're getting to do that collaboratively. Then we're going to discuss and write down important vocab notes and notation. And finally, some sort of practice. This is before they get to the formal CYUs. I always do CYUs in Delta Math or in Desmos when possible because self-checking and so good for my students. Okay, so that's my new 6 steps. Those are what I'm thinking. I think some practical tips for implementing this method. This includes, interactive discussion. So you're going to be fostering a classroom environment where students feel comfortable sharing ideas. So that's super exciting. If you need to beef up your ability to foster that interactive discussion, again, I highly recommend the 5 Practices book. Easily one of the most influential books I ever read in my teaching career. Using technology. So when possible, I'm still going to be using tech tools for creating and sharing notes. That's really for accessibility for all my students. If they weren't here, they missed out on that great discussion piece. They can capture some of that still in some blended guided notes. They might also just want to see me go through the problem. And so they'll have that access, right? It takes 2 minutes for me to talk through a problem to show them step by step. And they really might just need their teacher understanding for that. Also allows for flexibility. So you can adapt this note-taking process to fit your classroom's unique needs and constraints, guys. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach. I've been experimenting in my 4 different classrooms over the past 3 years. So this is just kind of where I'm landing right now. And there are really some amazing resources around you if you want help, from grabbing that Building Thinking Classrooms book or the 5 Practices from Amazon. I'll link those in my show notes, or joining a discussion in one of the many BTC focused social communities all over Facebook, or even in our very own Modern Math Teacher Facebook movement group. You're sure to be able to continue this conversation and get the support you need to have an even more successful thinking classroom for next year. So, as you're rebuilding your thinking classroom, remember, keep doing what you're doing well, whether that is the thinking tasks, the groups, the VNPSs. Keep building on that strong foundation. Pick 1 or 2 things to start in the fall that you want to refine. So for me, that is the consolidation piece and the note-taking piece. And of course, we'll talk grading at another time. All right, guys. So thanks so much for joining me for today as we discuss all sorts of strategies for rebuilding our thinking classrooms this fall. That's it for this episode of Poolside PD. I'm going to go get out to my pool. So in the meantime, go keep trying new things, keep reflecting on how they went, keep what works, and feel free to drop what doesn't. And as always, you guys, till next time, keep it real.